What is the solution to Brexit? Well, today we're going to find out. The idea of this video is not to lecture you on my opinions on Brexit, but it's merely to present the information needed for you to make up your own mind on the Brexit deal that we get. So, potential options for Brexit include Chequers, or Theresa May's current deal that she's negotiating with the EU right now, a no deal, to walk away from the negotiations and deal under World Trade Organization rules with the European Union, a second referendum, whether that includes an option to remain or not, but a second referendum on Brexit, and an election. A general election is fairly self-explanatory. We vote between Labour, the Conservatives and other parties, and whoever wins, probably out of Labour and the Conservatives, becomes the next Prime Minister with a hung parliament or a majority. Or we could come up with a completely new deal, such as a Canada Plus style deal, a Norway style deal, but something completely different to Chequers or the current deal Theresa May is negotiating. So let's review all of these possible options. So nobody likes Chequers really, so let's cross that one off. We're going to scratch Chequers because we're coming up with a deal today, guys, and I want one that you guys can agree on. Nobody likes Chequers. I'll explain why later on in the video. A no deal is a threat to the economy and it doesn't solve the Northern Irish border issue, which I'll explain later. But having a no deal as an option, no deal, let's not forget, is a form of Brexit because it involves leaving the EU, and a no deal is a way for Theresa May to get her deal passed through Parliament by threatening the no deal scenario where our economy may suffer more than the potential deal. So I'm highlighting it orange as a maybe. A second referendum is still an option. A lot of people want a people's vote with an option to remain in the European Union. A second referendum doesn't necessarily mean it has to have an option to remain. It could be a vote on the specifics of Brexit, and therefore I'm going to put a second referendum as a maybe in the options. Again, an election is just as equally a maybe as an option for either getting a second referendum in terms of making sure Labour win the next election, and they have said they will offer a second referendum along with the Lib Dems and the SNP. An election also means if Labour win it, they can go ahead and negotiate their own kind of deal. So an election is an option as a solution to Brexit. And then of course there's a completely new deal. The only problem with a completely new deal is the time we have between triggering Article 50 and the time it's supposed to end in March 2019. Again, with all of these maybe options, they both come with time constraints. A no deal means that we will have to get it passed through Parliament and get the Cabinet to agree to walk away with the no deal. A second referendum means that we have to come up with a question and get that approved by Parliament as well. An election means that we have to get Parliament to agree to hold an election and then go through the campaigning stages. And a new deal takes even more time than that because it means going through the entire process plus a new government or a new leader in terms of a new Tory leader, and coming up with the new set of negotiating strategies and negotiating with the EU, getting the EU to approve it and getting Parliament to approve it. But it's still a maybe as an option for Brexit. So I talked a lot about the timetable just then. So what actually is the timetable? So by the 18th of November 2018, the EU is supposed to hold an emergency summit, and we are supposed to have a deal by then. It was supposed to be by October, but it might now be by the end of November. Or, on the 13th of December, there is another EU emergency summit, where we could still then have a very, very, very last minute deal. We have until the 21st of January 2019 for the UK Parliament to vote on that deal, and either approve it or disapprove it. If they disapprove it, Theresa May says that we'll go for a no deal. If they approve it, we will get that deal passed. But they have until the 21st of January to make any amendments and changes and get all that through Parliament, which is a very, very short time period considering the nature of the changes that we're going to make to the country. The EU Parliament have until the 11th of March 2019 for them to agree that the deal that we're offering. Again, we have to negotiate with them. All 27 member states have to agree with the deal that we negotiate. And then on the 29th of March 2019, Britain officially leaves the EU. But the UK and the EU have already agreed a transition period that will go on until the 31st of December 2020. Now, there's talk of extending this transition period by a matter of months to sort out the Northern Irish issue. After the 31st of December 2020 is when we're supposed to be in full Brexit. So what's the hold-up? What's the problem with getting a deal to leave the European Union with the EU? Well, the first problem is Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland don't want a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland on the island of Ireland. That means free movement of goods and free movement of people, so they can travel freely across that border. Which means that the UK, which includes Northern Ireland, needs to have the same customs rules as the EU and free movement of people across that border. Therefore, we can have no hard border. Brexit was interpreted as a vote against immigration, and the government has promised to control immigration. To control immigration, you need to end free movement of people, which means being outside of the single market. Being outside the single market means the economy suffers. When the economy suffers, it leaves the gaps in the job market because there are less immigrants to fill those jobs. This leads to a pressure to fund public services such as the NHS because there are less doctors and nurses to actually do the job of treating people. And so the default is to rise immigration, which makes people angry, which makes people want to control immigration once again. Of course, a rise in immigration also creates a pressure to fund public services because there's more people using the NHS and the schools and more houses need to be built. A rise in immigration also means unemployment because there's more immigrants coming in to take jobs. And a rise in employment means the economy suffers. So the big consensus with Brexit is that we need to be outside of the single market. Even though the economy is going to suffer, we have to control immigration to stop all this side of the chart. Another reason why people voted for Brexit was sovereignty. Sovereignty means being able to make your own decisions as a nation. To be able to do that, you need a strong and stable economy. To have a strong and stable economy, you need a workable democracy with a lot of certainty. To be truly democratic, it means being outside of the rules which affect national internal matters. Now, many Brexiteers believe that the EU was interfering with our national internal matters too much. We can still be under the international trade rules that come with World Trade Organization rules, but they don't want it to affect the internal policies. So the government has interpreted this to mean no customs union and no single market. But to have a strong and stable economy, you need to have tariff-free trade with other nations in order to be able to import goods as cheaply as possible, which is why Theresa May came up with the Common Rule Book, accepting a lot of the EU's rules and copying and pasting them into UK law. But the Common Rule Book means having different rules to the EU, because we're no longer in the customs union and single market. Having different rules to the EU means a hard border in Northern Ireland. It also means that we will be under European Court of Justice law, because that Common Rule Book copy and pastes all the ECJ law into UK law. So, with all our options and problems on the table, let's try and work out a timetable to deliver Brexit properly. So Theresa May's plan is to keep this no-deal scenario hanging over Parliament in order to get her Chequers deal through Parliament. There is talk of extending the transition period, keeping Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK in the customs union during the transition period and working out a solution for Northern Ireland during the transition period, therefore extending it to be able to work out the solution. We will be staying in the customs union during the transition period, and the transition period will cost the UK. We will still be paying into the EU. Theresa May wants a common rule book for goods and regulatory flexibility on services. That is her Brexit plan. But there is another plan that the media keep talking about, kind of throwing the Labour Party under the bus kind of plan. Basically, because Theresa May won't get her deal passed through Parliament, many people feel that we're going to end up with a no deal, walking away from the EU without a deal, and therefore defaulting to World Trade Organization rules. That in itself would probably spark a vote of no confidence in Theresa May and could result in a general election as a result. And the likely party to win that general election would be the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party want to stay in the customs union, but they would also fight for a new deal, completely different from Theresa May's Chequers deal, because the Labour Party would have voted down Theresa May's Chequers deal based on their 6 key tests, and therefore they would be amending the Chequers deal to meet those 6 key tests. To amend the deal and renegotiate a deal would mean extending the transition period longer to be able to get this deal through both parliaments and agreed. And the Labour Party have said that should everything go astray, they would offer a second referendum with an option to remain. But here's my plan. We've already got Chequers, so let's go ahead with Chequers and try and get the Chequers deal done. We would have to stay in the customs union for now and during the transition period to be able to work out what to do with Northern Ireland and to not create a hard border over there. I'd look to amend the Common Rule Book so that it gave more powers to Parliament to be able to change the Common Rule Book. So during the transition period, I would be asking Parliament to find different options for the Common Rule Book that gave them enough control over what that rulebook was, but which didn't disagree with the European rules in order to affect trade too much. And then I would be trialing those different options during our transition period to find out which one works best for the economy. I'd also trial potential checks at the border, not full checks, but checks such as in a technological check. And I think the transition period could be used as a period of trial and error, a period of negotiation still, and a period of debate to really work out what it is we want to do with Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland wants to do with itself, and more importantly, what kind of trade we want to have with the EU during this transition period. I simply don't think we have enough time between now and March 2019 to be able to work out our future trade relationship with the EU. I think it should be completely up to Parliament to do during the transition period. And of course, if everything comes a bit too complicated, then I absolutely think that an election would help solve the issue with a majority government. Of course, an election takes the gamble that you might not have a majority government, but should there be a strong solution that you firmly believe and you can put in a mandate to win an election and you win a major majority in that election for a potential trade deal with the EU after Brexit, then that absolutely should be the governing party of the UK, and it would get rid of this reliance on the DUP to get a deal passed through Parliament, which massively affects Brexit at the moment. I just know that an election means that party alliances and party reputations come into play, and therefore Brexit might end up being pushed aside in favour of reputations for austerity in the economy and war and things like that. Okay, so I would offer a second referendum, but it wouldn't be the full second referendum at this point. It would be a second referendum in Northern Ireland, giving Northern Ireland the options to maybe ask, do you want to be in a customs union, or do you want to not, or do you want checks at the border, or do you want to remain part, maybe an independence referendum, do you want to remain part of the UK? I know that might cause a lot of turmoil and trouble in Northern Ireland, but I actually think it's a genuine democratic question. And if certain constituencies absolutely want to be in, and certain constituencies absolutely want to be out, then I think it might be worth redrawing the border a little bit, redefining what it means to be part of the UK, and maybe we could extend that second referendum to the rest of the UK and ask the rest of the UK what kind of trade it wants with the European Union once we figure out are potential trade options that aren't just reliant on Northern Ireland having a free border. I think if the rest of the UK doesn't want Northern Ireland as part of the UK, then there needs to be a serious debate that perhaps in order for us to get a trade deal that agrees with England, England should be allowed to have a say in how that trade deal gets through. So by the end of all this transition period, I think a new deal or an amended Chequers deal would come about anyway, and it would be more of a parliamentary decision than it would be a prime ministerial cabinet decision. You know, if we use this transition period as a period where the EU can come and join in the debate and give us as much information, because that's what we've seriously been lacking since Brexit started. If we found more about what was going on in these negotiating meetings than's being presented publicly, then we would know better and Parliament would be able to make more informed decisions on the deal. I actually think both the UK Parliament and the EU Parliament would be able to agree a deal if they knew actually what was going on behind the scenes and what it was specifically that they're talking about. Because at the moment we're just getting quotes about, oh, a deal is likely, a deal is not likely. And it's just not enough for us to make an informed decision about what it is we're actually voting on. And all of this, I'm afraid to say, would probably mean extending the transition period, because it's a longer process and because it means more agreement generally. But again, with more detail, I do believe that our Parliament definitely could make a more informed decision about what it is that they're voting for. But all the time, there's this hanging over that we can always just walk away with a no deal. At the moment, it's being used as a threat, and really it should be used as a form of reassurance to say, look, if we can't get a deal and everything goes to pot, what we can do is just leave the EU anyway. But we all know that leaving the EU comes with economic consequences. And that's why I think after we've realised these economic consequences and after we've got the detail, we've lived through the Brexit process and we've experienced the Brexit transition, that's when I think we should have a second referendum, a full second referendum with an option to remain. But not till after we've given it a go. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.